what's up, everyone? Welcome to Life in Your Show, where we help people make more, work less, and live better. I'm your host, Jason Wojo. I'm joined by my co-host, Polish Peter. What's up, bro?
Not much, bro.
Dude, I can't get over your background, and that's your like. Is this the new podcast background? Is we're looking at your house?
No, this is the moving transitioning background. So
okay.
I'll make a snazzy background just for you.
Because our listeners deserve and viewers deserve the best. And so speaking of that, we have an awesome episode coming up. We have two folks who you may already be familiar with. They run the BiggerPockets Money Podcast. This is Mindy and Scott, who are going to talk to us in this episode about personal finance. In particular, they've identified 4 levers. They didn't invent them, but they identified 4 different levers that they say, depending on where you are in life, what your interests are, what you want out of life, one of these 4 levers will help you become wealthy.
Right. And cool thing about those 4 levers is they're pretty simple. If you start listening to it, you're going to see that how simple they are. And that's a very good thing because it allows you to really get to figure out which part of your life, which lever should I be pulling in order to make the biggest difference for myself and my life and my family's life. So
that's right.
I want you guys to listen from that perspective of, okay, which lever should I be pulling? And there's some really good golden nuggets that they drop over there during the episode. And we're going to talk about it actually after we finish this episode. So stay till the end.
We got some great stuff. That's right. Here we go. Here's our episode with Mindy, Jensen, and Scott Trench on BiggerPockets Money Podcast. Mindy, Scott, welcome to Life in Your Show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us. Really excited to be here.
Thank you so much for having us.
You guys may actually have a lot of listeners already that are on our channel, because in case you don't know who Scott and Mindy are, they run a pretty large podcast called BiggerPockets Money. And they talk about something which is self-evident here, which is money, right? We talk about money in life in here as well. And I think, money is one of these topics. And probably the reason why you guys cover this is like, it's such an important component to our success in life and how we manage it, how we make it, what we do with it, how we think about money. And you guys are now, I'm looking at your website right now, and you are at just about at episode 250. So you've been doing this for a while. You guys are pros. You have talked with a lot of people, and I encourage all of our listeners to check out the podcast as well. But Scott, before we began, you were telling us, we were kind of brainstorming like some of the things that would most benefit our life and our audience. And you talked about this really cool 4-step framework that I think would be cool for us to dive into and then explore a little bit in depth as to how each framework could apply to someone's different situation. But give us a background. Before we do that, I want to hear about you guys. How did you even decide to start the podcast, and why is it you two, and why did this interest you to get that going?
The company BiggerPockets has a set of forums, and in the forums, the number one question that I kept reading was, how do I get started investing in real estate with no money and bad credit? And my first thought was, well, you don't. That's a horrible way to start investing in real estate. You're investing from a position of financial weakness, and you are providing housing for somebody. You have obligations, you have legal obligations to make sure that the heat is working and make sure that, the roof doesn't leak. And when you don't have any money, you're not going to be able to make those repairs should they happen, or should they, need to be repaired. So we decided to create this podcast. Hey, let's take care of this no money and bad credit situation. Let's fix your credit. Let's get you on the path to financial stability so that you can start investing in real estate from a position of strength.
It makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, absolutely. So we started with that intent. Building a strong financial foundation in order to invest in real estate is really kind of the original purpose of our podcast. But we've evolved, I think, since then to just kind of like embrace every money story and kind of hear about how folks can in general achieve their money goals. Although we definitely have a predilection, that's my big word of the day, towards FIRE and financial independence with that. Most of the folks that are coming around are looking to at some point achieve that, in part, I think really aligned with the values that you guys have in Life in Air.
Well, and that's interesting, man. So you guys are really a part of that, I think, for your audience. And so I'm really excited to hear about this framework, which, as we kind of started talking about, really sounds like it pretty much encompasses almost everybody at some phase of their financial journey and where they are in life. And so there's something here for everyone. So regardless of where you are financially, there's something in this episode for you. So let's dive into that, Scott. What does that look like? And by the way, did you guys invent this, or is this something you guys kind of came through after having all of these interviews with people? Or how did this develop?
We've invented nothing, I think. So we have heard and compiled and okay, Mindy's invented a lot.
I'll take credit for all of it. Scott has invented nothing. I created the whole thing. I mean, what are the 4 levers, Scott? We didn't invent these 4 levers. Maybe we collected them together and said, these are, the 4 levers you should use, but spending less is not something that we invented. I would love to take credit for that. I'll take credit for that.
So we approach, I think, essentially all or the vast majority of financial situations with a very simple framework where if you want to become wealthier, you have essentially 4 options. You can spend less, you can earn more, you can invest, or you can create. And those options apply to different people at different stages in their journeys, dependent on a number of situations. So for example, someone who is, in college, or, getting started in life, they might really have an opportunity on that create side because they've got that's a good time to start a business or try a lot of side hustles or go down those routes. But investing is probably not a good option. Not to say that people shouldn't invest. It's just not a major lever in their financial position because they have no assets to invest because they haven't had time to accumulate them or begin building those up. And it's not really, there's some opportunity to earn income, but maybe part-time jobs, those types of things in that period versus someone who's, married with kids, that are young and earns $150,000 a year. Okay. Well, maybe creating a business or a side hustle at that point in time is not a really good use of time. And instead we have gaining control of that budget, continuing to work for that next promotion at work and putting together an appropriate investing strategy is what's going to move them toward their financial goals. So we're able to apply those frameworks. There's other bonus ways to get rich, like marrying rich or inheriting or winning the lottery, but those are less common. And we actually probably should get a couple of guests who have gone through those on the show at some point.
That'd be interesting, right?
How you do that? How you marry richer? Maybe this is the
Peter,
whole
it's
topic
too late for you, buddy.
about, right?
You tell me.
But listen, go ahead.
I was going to say, so one of these clearly stands out to me as that's probably the least favorite of all of them. And that is that is spending less. And so I'm curious if we're going to unpack each of these to some detail. I'm curious on the surface, the math works, let's spend less, but how do you guys actually get people to buy into this? Okay.
So that's the least popular one, but how many people do you know are at the end of their spending limits? They're spending so little that there's nothing left to cut.
Yeah.
That's the least popular, but it's also the one that's pretty much available to everybody.
Everyone. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at, just think about all the things that you spent money on in the last week. Did you need every single one of those? No, I don't even know what you spent money on. And I know that you didn't need every single one of those things. So that's the easiest thing. That's the easiest lever to pull. If you have decided, I want to invest in real estate and I have no money in bad credit and I'm terrible with money and I want to change my financial future. I need to look at where my money's going. I'm spending too much. That's most everybody who's listening, is that if they want to change their financial future, they're spending too much money and they need to change that. So that's the lever that is easiest to pull.
Yeah. And there's a lot of power behind that from if you want to pull put your analyst hat on and say, why mathematically is that such a good place to start? Well, if the less that you spend, several obvious things happen when you chain them together. You get some epiphanies with this, but when you spend less, you have more cash to then invest. You're able to just stockpile assets faster. So that's one. Two, let's say that you drop your annual spending from, are you guys familiar with the 4% rule?
Yep.
Okay, great. So for those listening who want a quick refresher, that means that let's say I have $1 million in assets. If I invest in a stock bond portfolio, then I can safely withdraw 4% of that portfolio or $40,000 and likely never run out of money, or at least never run out of money over a 30-year period. So a lot of math to do that. It's a very fun debate that has happened about 1,000 times in the financial independence community. You can go find it more. So anyways, but let's say that you're spending $80,000 a year. If you drop that to 40, not only are you saving an additional $40,000, but now you've dropped the amount of assets that you need to retire early and probably live the life that I would imagine we talk a lot about on the Life in Air podcast and Life in Air book, at least, which I really enjoyed with that. Like it's a much faster way to go about it. You're drastically accelerating. And then the third advantage is the tax benefit. If you're earning $100,000 a year and you increase your income by $10,000, you're probably only going to realize $6,000 or $7,000 of that. But if you reduce your spending by $10,000, you have $10,000 more dollars to invest. And so for those three reasons, it's a really, really powerful lever for most people, although probably the least fun in many people's minds.
Well, I think that the other reason why people are looking from that saving as such a bad thing and taboo kind of a thing is because they're looking at what they can't have as opposed to what they can have. Right?
That's right.
Yes.
And I think what you touched on is the things that you can have, because I think if you get into the mindset of spending less, that habit probably impacts your life in so many other ways. Would you guys agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When I tell you you can't spend so much money, you instantly hear, well, I can't have anything nice. That's not what that means at all. What that means is you should be conscious of where your spending is going, where your money's going. Did I need, and the getting coffee out is the, I was always going to say something offensive. Sorry. Getting coffee out is the thing that everybody loves to kick. But let's say you spend $5 on a drink at Starbucks. Is that going to ruin your financial life? Probably not. But if you go there 5 times a day, that's $25 a day. That's $125 a week. That's $500 a month. That's $6,000 a year. That's funding your Roth IRA, which is math I had already done previously. Don't get all impressed. But
That was very impressive.
Very well done. Very well done.
I did that on the fly.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of things you could have a fully funded retirement simply because at age 20, you chose not to go to Starbucks 5 times a day. Or you could, instead of going out to lunch every single day, how much does lunch cost? $12, $15 times 5. I didn't do this math in my head, so that's going to be more. 15 times 5, let's call it 60. I don't know.
Sounds good to me.
75. And $75 a week for lunch every single day. What can you do with $75 a week? Well, we just said you can fund your Roth IRA very easily simply by, and I'm not saying don't eat. I'm saying don't go out and buy your lunch. You can make lunch at the office for $3 or $5. You could splurge for $7 because you're making it from home. It's a less expensive option. You still get food. You still get nourishment. You're just looking for ways to cut your expenses. So that's what it means by spend less. It doesn't mean get rid of everything. You can still eat really well. You can still have fun and go do things that are really important to you. Just don't spend money mindlessly on dumb stuff that doesn't matter.
Yeah, and to piggyback on this, we have this format of our podcast called the Finance Friday, where folks come on and they say, "Here's my spending, here's my income, here's my assets, here's my liabilities. What should I do?" And a lot of times it comes down to like, well, what do you want, right? Like, so the first part of this that comes out is, what does my desired future lifestyle look like? What do I want to get to in 5 years, 10 years? You put together a vision or whatever it is that you want out of life with that. And your financial plan backs into that. And sometimes we get folks that are like, hey, I'm really content with my job. I'm ready to work for another 20 years. Things are great. I'm saving, all that kind of stuff. Well, you shouldn't then cut out your latte and cut back your spending and all that kind of stuff, because you're going to become wealthy. If you deploy basic habits of like funding your IRA and putting those things together, building a nice emergency reserve, you can continue along that path. And there's no reason to stop that spending if you're content with those types of things. For me, when I got started, I really badly wanted financial independence. It was like this visceral thing. Like I have to have complete independence from, at least I can't depend on a paycheck for that. And that was a real motivator in my life. So I went all out. I did all of this kind of stuff. I made every meal, biked to work, lived in half of a duplex to cover the mortgage and all that kind of stuff. And that was what I wanted. For me. And so it just depends on your goals about how far you want to go down this particular lever, but it is the most powerful one for many folks who are working a full-time job, at least.
So I'm hearing that it's very subjective as to like how far you want to cut and how drastic or how simple or small the steps you want to take are.
That's right. And it just depends on your goals and your situation and what's the most powerful lever. Like if you're making $500,000 a year, then cutting back on your latte expense is not going to matter at all compared to how you're framing your investment approach or how you go from 500 to 600,000 with that. But if the reality is many people are sitting in this, $50,000 to $200,000 a year income range. That's the majority of BiggerPockets real estate investors, for example, with that. And for those folks, the spending lever is just such a powerful one that you can't really ignore because it's so hard to get a similar percentage increase in your wealth accumulation from income production or investing while you're getting started.
That's great, man. So that actually kind of leads me to what the second one, which is making more. So my question as it relates to watching expenses is there seems with expenses to be a law of diminishing return, which at some point you get to a point like, hey, I can't really cut that much. Yep. I'm not going to sell my dog. And so like you turn to, hey, now maybe it's time to make money. One thing that we've talked about is when we help people with money is we said, hey, think of a football game. You got offense and defense. Defense is how you manage your finances, your expenses. Offense is your ability to make money. Work on your defense first, because what happens otherwise is you make more money, you spend more money. Mindy, you alluded to this. I don't know if we were recording yet, but you said, hey, you make more money, you spend more money. And so you spend everything you have. And so I love that this is a lever here for you guys. So at what point or when should somebody start talking about, and how do we start talking about making more money?
It's not an either or. You don't first focus on spending less, get that under control, and then focus on earning more. We talked to Erin Lowry on Erin Lowry. I always mispronounce her name. Erin Lowry on episode 169 of our show about difficult money conversations. And she had what's possibly the most brilliant idea I've ever heard of. She said, in your work inbox, have a folder called praise. And anytime somebody sends you an email thanking you for anything that you've done at work, file it in that folder. Because when it's time to ask your boss for a raise, you're not going to remember all the praise that people have heaped on you. You're not going to be able to find that email when it's time to. So you just file it away throughout the whole year. And when it's time to ask for a raise, you go through that email. You also keep a document documenting all of the things that you've done during the course of your year. Then when it's time for the raise, you go in and you present your case. Hey, I'd like a raise. I want a 12% raise because I have enacted these changes. I've seen these results. And here's a stack of letters. You print those out, even though we're trying to save the trees. You print those emails out. You hand this giant stack to your boss. Look at how many people think I'm the greatest thing since sliced bread. And you ask for a raise. But also, earning more doesn't just mean at your W-2. So many people have a hard time asking for a raise that they don't do it, but that doesn't mean you can't go out and get a get a second job, do a side hustle. Nick Loper has an entire podcast called Side Hustle Nation, where he talks about different side hustles. Not every side hustle is going to be for you, but there is a side hustle out there for everybody. There's work from home jobs that you can do in your spare time, legitimate ones, not those stupid ones that are like, oh, stuff envelopes for $50 an hour. That doesn't work. Right. But there's legitimate side hustles that you can do from home, that you can go out and work. And there are all sorts of ways to generate income legitimately online, and you just have to look for it. Nobody is going to call you up and say, hey, would you like some money? That doesn't work. You have to go and take action. But when you go and take action, earning more is kind of easy.
Yeah, I think there's a tremendous body of tips and tricks that have accumulated over the years while we've been chatting with folks about how to ask for that raise or get that extra side hustle. Another way to kind of view it is through this lens of at the strategy level, the 5-year plan with this kind of stuff. And at some point, you have to ask yourself the question, is my career path going to give me that income generating potential? And am I willing to put up with that? There's lots of reasons to put up with a lack of income generation potential. For example, if you love your job and you're a teacher, or you're in we've had firefighters on the show, or military. With that. And, there's a set path, and there it is with you. But there's also other career tracks that you can switch to that can offer that $100,000 or that six-figure base salary potential within a 3 to 5 year period for that. And so there's also kind of knowing when to at least ask that question or acknowledge the trade-offs that I'm making with my career on that, and knowing that there are options out there in 2021 to get you on that path. I will bring this back to the spending discussion for a second here and say that they're interrelated, because a lot of people are optimized on the income front, and they are in their minds, right? We're working the highest paying job that we reasonably could get to a certain degree, or that met the lifestyle criteria that I could pursue with that, right? I was between two jobs. I chose the one with the higher salary. I chose the one with the slightly lower salary because there was something better about that for my lifestyle with that. So I'm already optimized on that front. We find a lot of people are not often optimized on the spending front. Where I'm going with this, though, is let's say I make $60,000 or $70,000 a year. I make $70,000 a year and I spend $65,000 a year. I'm going to have a lot of trouble, and my career potential is going to bring me to 90 in 5 years. Okay, that's great. But I've got another career track where I have to dip down to $50,000 for the first year. And then I'm going to come out in 5 years at $120,000 or $130,000. That's a very real kind of situation that I think a lot of people could have access to, but it's unfathomable to go from making $70,000 and spending $65,000 a year to making less than I spend. Right. And that's where the spending thing, I think, comes into play. If you're able to get control of that spending, then you can take a job that's closer to that level, but has way more upside potential. So this, I think, all of these levers are interrelated to Mindy's point. It's not one or the other, it's one and they multiply as things go on.
Well, as you're talking about this, that example you just shared with us, I think that also applies for someone who's transitioning from a job into being a business owner.
100%.
Right? Because sometimes it is like I'm making, let's say, 6 figures, right, in my job, and now I want to go be a real estate investor, and I got to let go of the $100,000. I don't know about that, right? So I think that applies to that as well. You probably hear that a lot.
100%. This concept of runway, the amount of cash I have before I run out of money. Like let's say I spend $6,000 a month and I've got a $12,000 emergency reserve. I have 2 months of runway, right? Now, everybody's different. We've had people who are willing to become entrepreneurs with 2 months of runway and go and figure it out and build the plane with that. But we find that many people, there's an extended spectrum, I guess here, of the way people are oriented. And I think that as your financial position grows, let's say that I spend instead $4,000 a month and I've got $50,000 in the bank. Well, now I've got a year of financial runway, and maybe I've got $2,000 from my rental properties and another $1,000 in dividends from my stock portfolio. Now I've got a really long time to get that going. And that might be a good time to say, okay, it's time to walk away from that $100,000 a year job and start this business venture. I'm not going to run out of money for a long time, and I've got plenty of time to build that. Or some people are going to start, hey, I've got $5,000 to $10,000 in passive cash flow in $1 million or $2 million portfolio. And I spend that $4,000 or $5,000 a month before they leave. Everyone's wired differently, but as your financial position improves, in particular with that accessible liquidity that's in your emergency reserve and or passive cash flow, we find that unlocks their potential. That's like what we're all about with that is unlocking. That person is then going to only continue working because they love doing what they're doing, or they're going to start a business or a nonprofit, or just go live their best life in some way that's going to have that. And I think that's the power of personal finance in all of this.
Well, there seems like there's so many different combinations and permutations of people's skill sets, of their interests, of their resources, of what they want to do, that it's like you guys almost have to do like a real time. There's probably some solid concepts and some principles that guide your decision making, but there's also some degree of subjectivity as well as you advise people and go through situations.
Well, I mean, it's all about what you want, right?
Yeah.
So that's the hardest part of all of this. What do I want? If I want to retire in 30 years with the biggest pile of money possible, okay, there's one strategy that suits that. If I want to, be done in 3 years, and I'm willing to cut my expenses to a really low level and invest, there's an approach for that that'll work. If I want some sort of hybrid, where I can kind of wean off over 7 to 10 years, at least from dependence on the paycheck, there's another approach for that. The hardest part is, what do you want? And so the best way to, probably most folks listening to this are like, I don't know what I want with all this kind of stuff. So for that, if you don't know what you want, we actually just kind of uncovered this yesterday. The episode will get released way later. I don't remember, but we're like, okay, if you don't know what you want, what's a good financial plan, right? If you don't know what you want out of life, I think it's flexibility. Build out that runway. Don't go all out. Don't stop funding your retirement accounts and do all this other kind of stuff, but build up that emergency reserve of 6 to 12 months and begin thinking about, how do I generate some passive cash flow with the 80-20 of my investing approach with that? Because if you don't know what you want, you're going to want that optionality. You want to be the guy with the $50,000 in reserves who's spending $4,000 a month with $3,000 in passive cash flow in a couple of years, because that will enable you to keep doing what you're doing or do something different with that. So I think it's a good bias towards that flexible, accessible liquidity and investing profile if you're not sure what it is you want out of life 5-10 years down the road.
I think that's wise. It gives you options. So which kind of leads us into investing. You mentioned kind of this, I think, a natural transition here. So walk us through what that looks like.
You need to invest your money. You need to invest wisely. What was the book? The Richest Man in Babylon is my absolute favorite personal finance book. It was written in 1920, so it's not new at all. I would love to say I invented it, but I'm not even that old. And George S. Clason, everything in that book is 100 years old and it's all brand new. And it's not rocket science. It's spend less than you earn more money, invest wisely with somebody who knows what they're doing. He tells the story of this. He takes the money that he had saved up and he invests with I think it's his plumber, who's like, hey, I got this line on some jewelry. And then the plumber lost all of his money because he didn't know what he was doing, because he doesn't know anything about jewelry. So invest wisely in things you know about or with people who know what they're doing. So you can't say today, I want to be a real estate investor, and then tomorrow buy a property. You need to do some research. You need to learn what you're doing, because yes, owning rental properties is as easy as buying a property and renting it out. But you can lose a lot of money by buying the wrong property, and you can lose a lot of money by renting it out to the wrong tenant. You want tenants who can pay their rent. You need to learn how to screen your tenants. You need to buy a property that's going to make sense. I can sell you a $20 million property in my neighborhood that's going to rent for $3,000 a month. That's not going to even pay your tax bill or your electric bill or your gas bill or anything. So that's a terrible property. I actually don't live in a $20 million neighborhood, but there are lots of ways to lose money in real estate. There's lots of ways to make money in real estate, but you have to find the ways to make money, or you will find the ways to lose money. And the same with the stock market. The same with what's the hot thing right now? Crypto. Can you hear me rolling my eyes? I'm bruising my eyes. I am rolling them so hard. I am not a fan of crypto. If you are, that's great. I'm not asking you to explain it to me. The number one reason why I don't invest in crypto is because I don't understand it. If you don't understand it, you should not be investing in crypto. If you don't understand it, you should not be investing in insert whatever type of investment here. And that includes real estate. That includes the stock market. That includes all these other things. You need to have a basic understanding of what you're doing before you start putting money into it. And that doesn't mean spend all the money you have until you figure out the stock market. There's this thing called the index fund. This is like the darling of the personal finance community right now. Low cost index funds means that they're not actively managed. You're not paying somebody to pick and choose what stocks go into this fund. It is automatically rebalanced. Scott, do you know how often they're rebalanced? I'm not quite sure.
I think it's very regularly. It might be daily.
So they're automatically rebalanced to what is in that index. So the S&P 500, all the stocks that make up the S&P 500 are in the S&P 500 index fund. I want to buy this. I want to put in $1,000 in there. I now own $1,000 of the S&P 500 index fund. And as the S&P 500 goes up, my $1,000 gains in value. If the S&P 500 goes down, my $1,000 goes down. But a rising tide lifts all ships. So instead of trying to pick and choose, oh, Tesla's on a tear right now. Well, great. They were on a big drop. So maybe that's not the right choice for me right now. Maybe Apple is great, or maybe IBM, the blue chip, is a really great one. I don't think they're in the S&P 500. I think I'm mixing my indexes, but whatever. When you own a portion of when you own the index, you own a portion of every single stock that's in that index.
Yeah.
That's a really easy way to invest until you figure out how you want to invest.
Yeah,
Scott, you look like you want to say something.
No. Going back to our levers discussion, spend less, earn more, invest, and create. If you want to achieve above average investment, and we talked about it's not one or the other. You can do all these things simultaneously, but you have to apply the 80-20 of your efforts to one of these at a time. You can be focusing this year on the budget and getting control of the expenses and really dialing those in, and ask for the raise, right? I mean, those are not mutually exclusive items with that. But when we talk about investing, it's if you're going to try to shoot for something that is beyond average returns, you need to put in some kind of effort in order to expect that. You can't just randomly choose 3 stocks with no effort and expect to get better returns than a stock market index. And you might get crushed with that kind of stuff. So what is it you want with that? And the reason why we talk about index fund investing to a large degree is because many people are not going to, perhaps most full-time employed workers are not willing, interested, or have the inclination to put in the dozens, hundreds, or thousands of hours to think about investments and look for alpha, the alpha being the extra return you could get from picking a set of carefully selected stocks versus an index fund. It's very hard to do that and it requires a ton of energy. And another key component is you need a big asset base for that to be worthwhile. If I get a 12% return on my stock portfolio over 20 years and my portfolio is $100, that's not very meaningful. If it's $10 million, then those extra percentage points add up. So you have to have a large asset base and have the inclination to want to go after that in order to make that work. So that brings us to other, that applies to essentially all these formats of investing. And we've talked to a guy who had a list of 50 investments, like horses. You can invest in fractional shares of horse ownership. You can invest in land. I saw an ad on Facebook the other day. You can invest in cattle now, like fractional shares of cows and all that kind of stuff. I'm sure those are all good asset classes, but you have to be willing to put in the effort to figure out what that return is going to look like. And if you're not willing to do that, then something that says, how do I just mirror averages for that asset class is a pretty good approach, in my opinion. And that's where the index fund comes back into. I'll also talk about real estate because that's probably one of the second most popular things with this. And I think what Mindy's alluding to with all that kind of stuff, or what Mindy's saying with all that, what she just said, is that there's a price to pay to enter into the game of real estate investing. And it's not just a down payment and the cost to get started. It's the 500 or 1,000 hours necessary to get comfortable with all the things that can go wrong, how to screen a tenant, why credit score is important, why past evictions history is important, what types of properties in my area, what the types of problems that they're going to have. Do I have termites? Do I have hail damage? Do I have flooding with those types of things? Where should I buy? What is cash flow? What does that mean? All those mental models need to be absorbed and experiences understood before I think you have a real good shot at actually earning the incremental return that may be able to get earned by real estate investors versus another asset class like stocks or small business investing or whatever it is that you're interested in. And so that is a great item for someone who's just getting started in their career, who's willing to put in that effort and use some of that leverage to buy a couple of properties over the next 5 to 7 years. Maybe not a great choice for someone who's earning a tremendous income and is not willing to put in those several hundred hours because they can coast to their financial goal by just living a nice middle or upper middle class lifestyle and saving their huge surplus with that. So there's different asset classes I think that make sense for different folks. And then I have one more thought because I can't help myself on this. The big question I think that no one has the answer to is where do I go even more broadly in the context of 2021? Do I go into stocks with valuations at all-time highs relative to, price to earnings ratios? Do I go into real estate with prices going up 20% nationwide on properties with this? Do I invest in bonds with yields at all-time lows? Do I keep my money in cash with inflation looming on the horizon with this? Do I put it into crypto with all the volatility there? Do I put it into another asset class? I think that's the big question that, folks are asking themselves around the country. And I don't think we have a great answer to that for that. I can tell you personally, I put most of my assets into private business. We here at BiggerPockets with that, and then stock market index funds and residential real estate in Denver, Colorado. Those are the three that I continue to put my money into, but I don't think anyone has a good answer to that broader asset question at this point in time with it.
Yeah,
everyone has a good answer, but no one. I don't know how anyone.
Well, that's
a
good answer. I mean, she was talking about, you can fractionally. I think it was you that were talking about fractionally investing to cows. So I'm like, well, am I buying the front of the cow or the back of the cow? Which one is it, right? And,
yes.
And how is that going to affect me, right? But I think what you guys are getting at here is that not only do you need to really look at what you're buying into, what you're investing in, what you're going after, but you also need to know yourself. Because I think one of the things that we do in Life on There, we first help them create a vision, right? What is your vision? What's the goal? You mentioned that. What's the plan that you're going after? And then how is it that you're going to be investing in? How is this aligned with that plan? Because if you hate being a landlord, it's probably not a good thing for you to be a landlord, right? I mean, there are some ways of doing it. You can hire a property management company, but knowing yourself probably is a big part of everything that you guys are talking about here. Is my about right?
100%. Yes. That's exactly it. What do you want out of life? And then does your financial plan match that?
Right. So let me ask you this, because I think we explored those 4 stages pretty evenly. And you guys have many podcasts about money that you guys have talked about. Relationship with money. Quickly, I know this is like a broad subject. My thinking is like, what have you guys found over all those conversations that you have had about people's relationship with money and what that should look like that will have the best impact on their future?
Ooh, so your early experiences with money have the biggest impact on your current relationship with money. You grew up poor, you might hoard money because you're afraid that you will lose it and be poor again. Or you might have the opposite current experience with money or relationship with money where you grew up poor. Now you can't spend it fast enough trying to make up for the past experiences. And your mental self is the biggest hurdle you have to get over when you want to change your mindset. And your past experiences are the number one thing that you have to kind of grapple with and comes to terms with. And, growing up poor doesn't mean you're always going to be poor. But until you change how you are looking at that, you may never be able to get over it.
Yeah, we've seen so many different relationships with money that it's like kind of hard to pinpoint all of them. The best, I think, analogy or description of like what I think a healthy relationship with money looks like comes from a blogger called Mr. Money Mustache. And he wrote his framework, and I'm going to butcher this, but he said your relationship with money should be like your relationship with tap water when it's done correctly over the long term. And here I'll give you a second here because I love this with this. He said, tap water, right? Like what you should create a base, or you should try to work towards a position in life where you've got such an abundance of it, like you do with tap water, that you're never going to worry about it running out. It's never an issue. It's just not something that fades out of mind while you live your life. When you need it, you go to the sink and you fill up your cup, or you fill up your jug, or you water your garden, or whatever it is. But you don't leave the water running unnecessarily with that. You don't just like turn on all the spigots and just let it go flying out of the roof. You just kind of view it as like one of those resources that I'm going to build up a basin of and a flow of, and then use as needed to fund my happy lifestyle with that. And I thought that was a really healthy a really interesting way to articulate a healthy relationship with money.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
I love that. Because I think it impacts every single one of these stages, that relationship and what you were talking about, the past, which leads me to, I think the last stage that you guys were talking about is about creating. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And if it comes to that, I mean, if you have the scarcity mindset, how you go create. So talk about that stage and how that actually works for people.
Yeah. So we kind of alluded to it a little bit earlier where we said that different people are going to be wired differently. Some people are going to be some people are willing to just live off their credit card while they start their business and figure out how to fund it at all costs with that kind of stuff. And sometimes that works out spectacularly, and sometimes that blows up spectacularly with that. Certain of those are covered more heavily than others in the media with entrepreneurs who are wired that way. But I would be willing to bet that a majority of people who are, at least those who are willing to listen to podcasts about money 45 minutes in, are going to be a little bit more, kind of have a little different orientation, where there's some sort of place where creation makes, if you're working a full-time job and making 150,000 or something like that, or $150,000 a year and working towards financial independence, then creating a business is going to be a huge diversion from that. And there needs to be some sort of phase out period. So building that strong financial position that we just articulated, that's, I think, when it gets easier and easier and easier to think about beginning to form the side hustle and then stepping away from the full-time work to focus on that business full-time. In fact, we know a lot of podcasters and folks who have kind of these types of things who have followed a trajectory very similar to that, where there's been a phased out period with it. But creating assets is the probably the most vast ocean of this. There's heavy overlap with investing, right? There's things that you can create that become totally passive, like authoring a book, for example. And there's things that you can create that take full-time effort for 10 years, like starting a business and trying to scale it into something large with it. So it's really kind of that world of imagination can be intellectual property, business, assets, and the rest of it with this. You can buy a business and begin taking it over, a franchise. There's so many different convoluted ways to I think, harness this lever. And it's just about when it applies to your situation with that.
Well, I think what you said before applies also, Scott, where, or many of you as well echoed this, like it's going to take you to go from an employee to being a business owner, not even a business operator. That's a whole different thing. Like, and many people just become self-employed on their own position of their own business, but you got to put in a lot of time and effort to learn those skills. Like, it's not just like you're not just born as a leader and as a developer and a visionary. Like, so all that same effort that you put in for an investment, you likely have to also apply when you make that transition, if you choose to become a business owner as well.
Yeah. And I'd say even more, I mean, right. To be a great business leader, I'd imagine you have to put in 10,000. That's like one of those 10,000 hour type things, right? To be a mediocre to good real estate investor, probably like 500 to 1,000 hours with that. And to be mediocre to good index fund or other types of investors, probably similar things. So there's a sliding scale there. But I think that the creation piece, if you want to scale that, make that something special, that's the part that's going to involve the most intense energy, but can also be the most fun or have the most the greatest financial rewards downstream.
Awesome. Hey guys, we're at our time. I want to really thank you for coming on. For all of our listeners, BiggerPockets money, right? That's where you'd send them. Is there anywhere else that they should be aware of?
Nope.
Yeah, biggerpockets.com and BiggerPockets Money. BiggerPockets Money is the podcast that Mindy and I host on personal finance, and biggerpockets.com is the website, podcast, YouTube, Facebook world of real estate investing that you can immerse yourself in if you're interested in learning more about that asset class.
Awesome. Well, thanks, guys.
Thank you so much. This is a lot of fun.
Dude, that was a lot of fun, man. Those 4 levers, they are simple. Like you said, like so let's just review them for everybody. So first one is, cut inexpensive. What can we cut back on? And I love what they said is it's super subjective. Like, how much do you want to give up? Right.
Yeah. And it's like we were talking about in the particular episode, is knowing yourself and knowing what your plan is. He brought it up several times. Yeah. You got to figure out what the plan is. And I think the important aspect to that is, and we do this in Life Hunter, think about it. We write your vision. So you're looking what the plan is in the future, not what the plan is right now in this very moment, because a lot of people make their money decision based on what's happening right now, but you start looking, what is my ultimate plan that I want to get to? So that's those right. Different levers are going to make a big difference. I keep hitting my mic. What's going on here?
Well, the second one was making more, right? And so in particular, they talked about your job, what we could do to ask for a raise or maybe even a side hustle. Nick Loper has been on the Life Hunter Show podcast. Go back and check out that episode. Maybe we can find something in the show notes there about that. And so that's a great way as well, because you don't want to just do one of these. Really, you kind of want to take advantage of all of them. Ultimately, most likely, maybe not, right? If that's not your goal, but like making more is part of it. The third one is investing, and my takeaway there, Peter, was like, hey, there's no one investment for everybody. Number one, but number two, whatever your investment is, you got to do your due diligence. Like, don't take a tip from a friend just because your buddy's buying a rental house. Don't go out and buy one. Don't buy crypto just because like it's a hot thing right now. Like, do your research. Become someone who's fluent in the language of that investment you're talking about.
Right. So as you're talking about this, the one thing that keeps popping up for me is a lot of people, when they go into this particular stage, the shiny object syndrome, that squirrels show up like crazy. So it's very important for you to do that due diligence, to be able to research it, not just because all of a sudden somebody made $50,000 on the deal. Yeah. That's not the only criteria, right? You have to dig deeper into this, and knowing yourself, who you are, and all that kind of stuff will help you get towards that plan that we talked about throughout the whole episode. Right.
Well, dude, there's so many things out there. Like, you have NFTs out there right now. You have all these, gazillion options. And so you just
invest in a fractional cow. Dude,
yeah.
I didn't know that you can partially invest in a cow. Come on.
You should look into that.
Yeah. And we're investing to the back of the cow as opposed to the front of the cow.
That's right. So, and here's the last one is creating. Like, so this is, again, this isn't for everybody. Not everyone is meant to be a business owner, nor they want to be. Now, I do think that, and if you want it bad enough, you could become a business owner. I certainly wasn't trained in any business sense. And, I kind of learned it, and it wasn't natural to me, and I learned it. And so there's nothing special about me. Everybody can learn what you want to learn if you have a reason that's big enough for you. So if you're in a job that is not meeting your needs and you don't want to work for somebody else, well, maybe you got to do the work to step into this realm. So again, got to do the research. There's no set plan. There's no set prescription for it. It's really a one-off situation. And I loved your question too about how people think about money, because that influences all of this.
Yeah. All those 4 levers. I mean, think about it, right? And Mindy was talking about, if you have a scarcity mindset, it comes back to your past, right? And I think maybe we should record an episode in the future about the relationship with the money. Yeah. If you're interested, shoot us an email or text or on the app, put it on there, and we'll record an episode like that for you. But it is so important to know what that relationship is for you and your money. Because it's going to influence how you attack each one of these levers. Your decisions.
That's right. Well, hey, listen, we hope you've enjoyed this episode. Go over to BiggerPockets Money to learn more about what they're doing over there. They're up to like 250 episodes. So if you want to check that out, go ahead and do that. Really enjoyed sharing this episode with you. Hope you enjoyed it as well. If you want to be part of the Life Inner conversation, go ahead and download the free Life Inner app. Go to lifeinner.com to learn more. Or you can also leave us a review, leave us a rating. We'd love to hear from you as well. Like, what kinds of topics and episodes and guests would you like to see on the show? So until then, we want to make sure that you have all the tools you need to become wealthy and live the life of your dreams. And that's with the Life Inner Vision. We'll see everyone next week. Take care, everyone.